She slammed the bill down so hard the wine glasses rattled. Naomi's mother didn't even look up. She was already reaching for her purse, not to pay, but to pull out her compact mirror and reapply her lipstick. Around the table, her aunts exchanged smug little smiles. Her father leaned back in his chair like a man who had just won something. "Well," her mother said, snapping the compact shut, "you're not going to let it just sit there, are you?" $19,842. That was the number printed on the bill. And every single person at that table knew exactly who was going to pay it. Naomi reached for her card without a word, and they laughed. Not quietly, not politely. They laughed, the kind of laughter that fills a room and empties a person at the same time. If that were you sitting in that chair, what would you have done? If you've ever been the one person in your family who gives everything and receives nothing, not even basic respect, then you already know exactly how Naomi Carter felt in that moment. You know the particular weight of swallowing your own dignity to keep the peace. You know how a laugh from the people who are supposed to love you can cut deeper than any stranger's cruelty ever could. This is her story. And I promise you, by the time it's over, you will never forget it. If you're watching this for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because the stories we tell on this channel are the ones that stay with you. Drop a comment below and tell me the city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. It costs you nothing, but it means everything. Now let's go back to where it all began. Naomi Carter had learned early in life that love was not free, not in her family. In her family, love came with a price tag, a set of conditions, and a running tab that was always, somehow, in your name. She was the oldest of 3 children born to Harold and Vivian Carter, a couple who had built their entire identity around appearances. Harold worked in sales, or had, until a series of bad investments and worse decisions slowly dismantled whatever modest career he'd once had. Vivian had never worked a day that she considered beneath her, which meant, practically speaking, she hadn't worked in about 15 years. They lived in a house that was too big for what they could afford, drove cars that were slightly beyond their means, and attended every social event they could wrangle an invitation to, dressed in clothes that quietly suggested wealth without quite achieving it. They had 2 daughters and a son. The son, Marcus, had moved to Atlanta years ago and kept his distance with the focused discipline of a man who had learned his lesson early. He sent birthday cards. He called on holidays. He kept the wall between himself and the family drama smooth and well-maintained, and Naomi privately respected him for it, even as she resented the fact that she'd never managed to do the same. The younger daughter, Diane, was 29, beautiful in the sharp, competitive way of someone who had always been compared to an older sibling and decided to win on different terms. Diane dressed well. Diane laughed loudly. Diane had strong opinions about everyone else's life and a remarkable tolerance for never examining her own. And then there was Naomi. Naomi, the firstborn. Naomi, the responsible one. Naomi, the one who had figured out at the age of 12 that if she didn't hold things together, they would fall apart, and somehow internalized that as her permanent job description. She had built something real for herself, genuinely real, not the performance of success her parents preferred, but the actual thing. A consulting firm she had started from nothing at 26, a roster of corporate clients that had grown year by year through hard work and an almost punishing attention to detail, and a reputation in Chicago's business community that she had earned without her family's help, without their connections, and frequently in spite of their interference. She was 37 now. She had a firm with 11 employees, a brownstone in Lincoln Park, and a husband who looked at her like she had personally hung the moon. Her family had never forgiven her for any of it. She met Kang Min-jae on an ordinary Tuesday. That was the part that still caught her off guard when she thought about it. No dramatic circumstances, no destined collision. She had been standing in line at a dry cleaner on Michigan Avenue, irritated because her usual dry cleaner had closed unexpectedly, and she had a presentation the next morning, and the cream blazer she needed was the only thing standing between her and a very expensive wardrobe malfunction. He was standing 2 people ahead of her in line. Tall, quiet. The kind of still that isn't emptiness, but something more deliberate. The stillness of a man who has decided exactly how much space he intends to take up in any given room and is comfortable with that decision. He turned around because the elderly woman between them had dropped her ticket and couldn't bend down easily to retrieve it. He'd picked it up, handed it back, and then, only then, noticed Naomi watching him. He hadn't smiled immediately. That was the thing she remembered. Most men, when they catch a woman looking at them, perform something. A grin, a look away, and look back. Some small theater of awareness. Min-jae had simply held her gaze for a moment with an expression that was completely unreadable, and then turned back around. She'd been annoyed, then intrigued. Then, 3 weeks later, across a dinner table at a Korean restaurant in Wicker Park, where he'd asked her, with zero fanfare, if she'd like to have dinner with him sometime. She'd said yes before she'd even fully processed the question. He told her he worked in hospitality. He owned several restaurants, he said, and had interests in a few properties. He said it the way people say things they are not particularly interested in discussing, and Naomi, who had spent enough time around businessmen to recognize the particular exhaustion of someone who doesn't want to talk about work at dinner, had let it go. What she noticed instead was that he listened. Not the performative listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak. Actual listening. The kind where he asked follow-up questions about things she'd mentioned 20 minutes earlier. The kind where he remembered, on their third date, that she'd said something in passing about her mother, and gently, without pressing, asked how that situation was going. Nobody in Naomi's life asked how that situation was going. They assumed she was handling it because she always handled everything, and handling things was her function, Min-jae asked. She married him 14 months after the dry cleaner. Her family's reaction to Min-jae had been, from the very beginning, a thing she carried in her chest like a stone she refused to put down. Her mother had looked at him at their first dinner together. A dinner Naomi had spent 3 days planning, cooking food she knew her family liked, setting a table she'd reset twice because the centerpiece looked wrong, and said, "He's quiet, isn't he?" in the tone people use when they mean something entirely different. Her father had shaken Min-jae's hand with the particular grip of a man who is trying to establish a hierarchy, and then spent the rest of the meal addressing all his questions about Min-jae to Naomi, as if Min-jae were not sitting directly across from him and perfectly capable of speech. Diane had been more direct, later, in the kitchen while Naomi was doing dishes. "He seems kind of cold," she'd said, picking up a glass of wine and leaning against the counter. "Like, not warm, you know? Is he warm with you?" "He's very warm with me," Naomi had said, scrubbing a pot she didn't need to scrub that hard. "I just mean, culturally, they're very different. You've thought about that, right? Like, long-term?" "I've thought about it," Naomi said, "because Mom and Dad, I know what Mom and Dad think, Diane." A silence. "I'm just saying," Diane said, and took her wine back to the living room. Naomi stood at the sink for a long moment, hands in the hot water, looking at nothing. She'd been doing that her whole life. Standing somewhere private, absorbing something, deciding to keep going anyway. Min-jae never said anything against her family. That was the thing that undid her sometimes when she thought about it. He watched them treat her with a casual cruelty that they had so thoroughly normalized they no longer even recognized it as cruelty, and he held his tongue, not out of weakness, she understood, but because she had asked him to. The first time he'd tried to say something, they'd been in the car after a Sunday dinner at her parents' house. Her father had spent most of the meal making comments about Min-jae's English, not because Min-jae's English had any flaws worth commenting on, but because it was a mechanism of diminishment her father had landed on and returned to with the reliability of a bad habit. Min-jae's accent was slight. His vocabulary was precise. He often expressed himself with a formality that Naomi privately found beautiful. The particular care of a man for whom English was a language chosen rather than inherited. Her father mocked it every single time. In the car afterward, Min-jae had been quiet for about 4 blocks. Then he'd said, in that even careful way of his, "I would like to speak with your father." "Please don't," Naomi had said immediately. "He speaks to you as though I know how he speaks to me." Then, "Min-jae." She'd turned to look at him in the passenger seat. "Please, not yet. Let me handle it my way." He'd looked at her for a long moment at a red light. The city reflected in the windshield, all that Chicago winter gray. "Your way," he said quietly, "has not worked." It wasn't cruel, it was simply true, and they both knew it. "I know," she said. "Just give me time." He'd given her time, he always gave her time. It was one of the things she loved most about him, and one of the things that broke her heart a little, because she understood, even if she couldn't have articulated it clearly, that his restraint was costing him something. The birthday dinner had been her mother's idea. Vivian Carter turned 65 in the third week of November, and she had decided, with the precise vision of a woman who had been planning events in her head her entire life, that she wanted a dinner at Aurelius. Aurelius was the kind of restaurant where the menu arrived without prices if you needed to ask. It was the kind of place where Vivian Carter had never eaten on her own dime, because Vivian Carter had never had that kind of dime, and had spent 50 years finding other ways to eat there. Naomi had not been consulted about the reservation. She'd received a text, not a phone call, a text, from her mother 3 weeks before the dinner, saying simply, "Your father and I want to celebrate at Aurelius. November 19th. Don't be late." She had not been asked to come. She'd been informed that she would be there. Min-jae had a meeting that night, something that had come up suddenly, the way his meetings always did, with no warning, no details, and a particular quality of tension around his eyes that Naomi knew not to probe. He'd apologized twice, which was unusual for him. He held her face in his hands before he left the brownstone that evening and told her to call him if anything happened. She'd told him everything would be fine. She genuinely believed it. The table at Aurelius seated 12. Vivian had invited her 2 sisters with their husbands, a cousin Naomi barely knew, Diane's boyfriend, whose name Naomi could never quite remember, Harold, and Naomi herself. 11 people around a white tablecloth under low gold light, and a sommelier who appeared at regular intervals to refill glasses that no one at the table seemed interested in moderating. The first hour was manageable. There were toasts. Vivian received her gifts with the particular graciousness of a woman who already knows she deserves them. Harold told a long story that was mostly about Harold. Diane laughed at everything and flirted mildly with the waiter. Naomi ate her food and kept her face arranged in an expression she had spent 37 years perfecting. Present, pleasant, not quite there. The first real cut came around the second course. Her Aunt Renee, Vivian's younger sister, a woman who had apparently decided sometime in her 60s that the social contract no longer applied to her, leaned across the table and said, loudly enough for the surrounding tables to register the general shape of the conversation, if not the words, "Naomi, when are you going to have children? Your husband is, what, 50? The clock is ticking, honey." Min-jae was 41. Naomi had corrected this before. "He's 41, Aunt Renee." "Well, still." A wave of the hand. "You don't want to wait too long, especially with—" A pause, a small, meaningful smile. "Well, different cultures have different expectations, don't they?" The table did not go quiet. It shifted slightly, the way conversations shift when something has been said that everyone acknowledges without acknowledging. Naomi took a sip of water. "We're focused on the business right now," she said, the same thing she always said. Her Aunt Renee returned to her soup, done, filed away, ready to be retrieved at the next dinner and deployed again. The second cut came during the main course. Her father, on his third glass of wine, started talking about Min-jae's restaurants. He used the word restaurants with a particular intonation, a slight softening of the first syllable, a barely perceptible addition of air quotes that existed in tone rather than gesture, that communicated with remarkable efficiency that he did not consider this a real career. "Has he expanded at all?" Harold asked, not looking at Naomi, addressing the table as if she weren't present. "Still just the 2 locations?" "He has other business interests," Naomi said. "Like what?" "Property, investments." Harold nodded slowly. Hospitality." He said the word the same way her mother had said quiet at that first dinner, as a container for something else entirely. "I just wonder sometimes if that's going to be enough. Long term." "We're doing fine, Dad." "I know you're doing fine, baby. You've always done fine." He smiled at her, a warm smile, a proud father smile, and somehow that was worse than the rest of it. "You carry that man, and you do it with grace." The table made small sounds of agreement, approval. Her mother reached across and patted her hand. Naomi kept her face exactly where it was. She was carrying a man. That was the story her family had constructed about her marriage, that she had chosen poorly, attached herself to a man who was not good enough, and was too proud to admit it. The fact that Min-jae had never asked her for money, never taken money, had in fact insisted on a financial arrangement before their marriage that kept their assets clearly separated. None of that reached them. It didn't fit the story. They preferred the story. The bill came at 10:47. The sommelier placed it in the center of the table with the particular discretion of a man who did this often enough to have developed a personal philosophy about it. The folder sat there. 11 people regarded it with the collective interest of people watching a problem that belongs to someone else. Her mother turned to Naomi. Not asked, turned, the way you turn toward a solution. You've got it, honey? There it was. No discussion, no pretense of dividing it, no performance of anyone else reaching for a wallet. Just that phrase, casual and total, delivered with the same energy as pass the salt. Naomi opened the folder. $19,842. Wine. Appetizers ordered for the whole table. A second bottle. A third. The Wagyu her Uncle Derek had ordered because he'd never tried it and wasn't going to spend his own money finding out whether he liked it. The birthday cake tier the restaurant offered, which her mother had said yes to without a word to Naomi first. She did the math, reflexively, the way she always did, not because it would change anything, but because some part of her was still, after all these years, waiting for the number to be small enough to be reasonable. It wasn't. She put her card on top of the folder. Her Aunt Renee said something to her mother in a low voice, and her mother laughed. Then her father laughed. Then Diane laughed, because Diane always laughed when the room was laughing, regardless of what the laughter was for. I swear, her Aunt Renee said, louder now, enjoying herself. Naomi is the family ATM. We don't even need a bank account. We just need Naomi. More laughter. Warm, easy, affectionate laughter. The kind that lands on its target and says, we're only teasing, lighten up, while making absolutely certain the target feels every word. Naomi looked at the tablecloth. The waiter came and took the folder. And Naomi Carter, 37 years old, successful entrepreneur, woman who had built everything she had from the ground up, sat quietly at a birthday dinner she hadn't been invited to so much as summoned, paying $20,000 for the privilege, while her family laughed at her and did not say a single word. Because she never did. Because in her family, saying something cost more than she'd ever been willing to pay. And because somewhere on the other side of the city, the man who would eventually end all of it was sitting in a room she wasn't allowed to know about, conducting business she was never supposed to understand, with people whose names she would never learn. And he had no idea, not yet, exactly what had just happened to his wife. The car service dropped her off at 11:43. Naomi knew the time because she checked her phone the moment she stepped out onto the sidewalk in front of the brownstone. Not because she needed to know the time, but because she needed something to look at that wasn't her own reflection in the dark town car window. 11:43. Cold November air that hit her across the face like a correction. She stood on the front step for a moment longer than necessary, her card still warm in her coat pocket from where she'd tucked it back after signing the receipt. $19,842. She'd tipped 20% on top of that. Because that was who she was. Because the waiter had done nothing wrong, and Naomi Carter had a policy about not letting other people's failures become someone else's punishment. She let herself inside and didn't turn on the lights in the front hall. She knew the house well enough in the dark. She hung her coat. She took off her heels and held them by the straps and walked in her stocking feet to the kitchen, where she poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter drinking it slowly, looking at nothing. Min-jae wasn't home yet. She could tell by the particular quality of the silence. His presence had a weight to it even when he was being perfectly still, and the house without him felt lighter in a way that was not quite comforting. She set the glass down. She pressed both palms flat on the cold countertop. She stood like that for a long time. She was not going to cry. She had made that decision somewhere around the third course, and she was holding to it with the grim persistence of someone who has discovered that some decisions, once made, require constant maintenance. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was tight. There was a place just below her sternum that felt like someone had pressed a thumb in and was maintaining steady pressure, but that was not new. That feeling had been there for so long it had become something close to normal. She heard the front door. Min-jae's entry into any space had a particular quality she'd noticed within the first month of knowing him. He did not announce himself. He did not make the sounds most people made, the keys dropping, the sigh, the habitual small noises of a person transitioning from outside to inside. He simply appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his coat, and looked at her. "You're home," she said. Unnecessary. She said it anyway. "Yes." He looked at her face with the focused attention of a man reading something that matters. How was the dinner? Not a question. The way he said things sometimes, not a question, not quite a statement, just a space held open for whatever she chose to put in it. Fine, she said. He didn't move from the doorway. He was still wearing his coat, which meant he hadn't been home long enough to take it off, which meant something had shifted in his evening, some schedule rerouted, and he had come directly to where she was. Fine, he repeated. It was her birthday dinner. We ate. It was fine. She picked up her water glass and took another sip and looked past him at the dark hallway beyond, and the silence stretched between them like something with weight and texture. Naomi. I'm tired, Min-jae. I know you're tired. Then, tell me how much. She set the glass down again, carefully, in the exact center of the ring it had already made on the counter. She looked at him. He was watching her with that expression she had spent 3 years learning to read, the one that other people probably mistook for coldness, and that she now understood was simply the face of a man who had stripped away all performance and was just looking at what was actually there. 19.8, she said. Something moved across his face. Not shock. She had the distinct impression that very little genuinely shocked Min-jae, but something colder and more considered. They didn't... No, she said. Nobody reached for anything. Nobody offered. Mom just... She stopped. She pressed her lips together. She just turned and looked at me. That's it. That was the whole thing. She just looked at me. He took off his coat then, slowly, and folded it over his arm. How many people at the table? 11. He nodded once, the way he nodded when he was calculating something, filing something away in a place she wasn't allowed access to. It's her birthday, Naomi said, and even as she said it, she heard how hollow it sounded, how rehearsed, how many times she had reached for exactly that sentence to fill exactly this kind of moment. It's her birthday. It's family. They're going through a hard time. They don't mean it the way it sounds. They love me. They just don't know how to show it. The whole catalog of things she told herself so that she could go to sleep at night and wake up the next morning and do it all again. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Did they laugh? He said. She didn't answer, which was an answer. He turned and hung his coat on the hook by the kitchen door with the precise, deliberate movement of a man controlling something that wants to move faster than he will allow it. Come to bed, he said, with his back still to her. You don't have to talk about it tonight. She followed him because she was tired and because he was right, and because sometimes the most loving thing a person can offer is permission to put something down for a few hours. But she lay awake in the dark long after his breathing had evened out beside her, staring at the ceiling with that thumb pressure feeling in her chest, and she thought about her mother's face in the restaurant. Not cruel, not even unkind exactly, just blank with expectation, the way you look at a vending machine when you've already pressed the button. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, her father called. She was at her office when the call came in, sitting across from her operations manager, Priya, going over Q4 projections, and she looked at his name on her phone screen and felt the immediate low-grade dread she had trained herself not to feel, but felt anyway. I have to take this, she told Priya, who nodded and began gathering her papers. She waited until the door closed. Hey, Dad. Naomi. His voice was warm, which was worse than when it wasn't. Harold Carter's warmth was a weather system. It had causes, it had purposes, and when you'd lived inside it long enough, you learned to read what was moving underneath it. How are you doing, sweetheart? I'm well, working. Good, good. A pause. The kind of pause that is not empty. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. She picked up her pen and set it down and picked it up again. Okay. You know the property on Halstead. She knew the property on Halstead. She had known about the property on Halstead for approximately 6 years, during which time she had quietly covered 3 separate mortgage arrears, totaling somewhere in the neighborhood of $47,000. Money her father had told her he would pay back and had not. Money that had never been spoken about again after the immediate crisis passed. What about it? She said. We've run into a situation. A situation. That was the language. Not I made a mistake or I spent money I didn't have or I need your help. A situation. Passive, structureless, implying that the situation had simply arrived, like weather, without human cause. What kind of situation, Dad? The bank they've been difficult about the second mortgage. You have a second mortgage on Halstead? A pause. We took it out last year. There were some expenses. When? Last March. Naomi, the when doesn't matter right now. It matters to me. We needed. He stopped. Reset. When he started again, his voice had the careful quality of a man who has run the conversation in his head and is now performing the version he decided on. There were some medical costs, your mother's procedure. Naomi's mother had not, to her knowledge, had a medical procedure in the past year. She had mentioned her knee. There had been injections. There had not been anything requiring a second mortgage. How much? Naomi said. The arrears right now are… How much, Dad? Silence. 86,000. She set her pen down on her desk and looked at it. $86,000. On a property she didn't own, for a mortgage she hadn't known about, because of expenses her father was characterizing as medical, with a vagueness that told her everything she needed to know about how true that was. I don't have that, she said. Not because it was true. It was, and it wasn't. The money existed, but it existed in places and for purposes. But because she needed to say something that wasn't yes, and this was the closest she could manage in the moment. Naomi. His voice changed. The warmth didn't leave exactly, but something harder surfaced underneath it, the way river rock shows up under shallower water. You know we wouldn't ask if we had any other option. You always say that, because it's always true. It can't always be true, Dad. It can't always be an emergency with no other option. That's not… She stopped herself, breathed. When is the bank calling it? We have 60 days. Did they send a notice? Yes. I need to see it. A beat. Naomi, I need to see the notice, Dad. All of it. The original loan documents, the arrears breakdown. All of it. I'm not saying no. Even as she said it, some part of her observed herself saying it with the clinical detachment of someone watching a pattern repeat. I'm saying I need to understand what I'm looking at before I make any decisions. The silence that followed was not grateful. It had a different texture, thin, slightly affronted, the silence of a man who had expected the answer to arrive faster than this. I'll have your mother send it over, he said finally. Thank you. We love you, Naomi. You know that. I know, Dad. She sat at her desk after she hung up and did not move for 4 full minutes. She timed it, watching the clock on her computer screen, because she had learned that she needed to give herself a defined amount of time to feel things before she put them away, or they would find her later at worse moments. 4 minutes. Then she called Priya back in and they finished the Q4 projections. She didn't tell Min-jae about the call that night. She didn't tell him the next night either. By the third night, she'd received the documents her mother sent. A disorganized collection of PDFs that she'd spent an evening sorting and trying to make sense of, and what she found there made the not-telling sharper and more complicated. The second mortgage on Halstead wasn't 86,000 in arrears. It was closer to 112. Her father had apparently arrived at 86 through a calculation that excluded the penalties and a separate personal loan he'd taken against the property's equity. And the reason for the loans? The actual reason, documented in the spending visible on the account statements he'd inadvertently attached, was not medical expenses. It was a gambling operation her father had been running on and off for nearly 4 years. Sports betting primarily, a few casino losses, a handful of wire transfers to accounts with names she didn't recognize that had the particular pattern of someone trying to pay back winnings owed to people you did not want to owe winnings to. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about the word situation and what it was doing in her father's sentence. She thought about the fact that she had covered his debts before, 3 times that she could specifically account for, and likely more that she'd paid without fully understanding what she was paying, and that each time had looked from the outside like a daughter, helping a family through a rough moment, and had actually been a daughter subsidizing a pattern that had no internal mechanism for stopping. She closed her laptop. She went to the living room where Min-jae was reading. He was always reading in the evenings, dense books about economics or history, or occasionally, which she found quietly endearing, Korean poetry. And she sat down on the other end of the couch and tucked her feet up and looked at him. He lowered the book. He waited. My father has a problem, she said. He listened to the whole thing. He did not interrupt, did not ask clarifying questions until she was completely finished, did not reach for her hand or make any gesture that could be interpreted as reassurance. He just listened with his full attention, the book closed in his lap, watching her face. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "How long have you known about the gambling?" he said. "I suspected. For a while." She looked at the window. "I didn't want to know. That's different from not knowing. I'm aware of that." "Naomi." He said her name the way he sometimes did, not as a summons, but as an acknowledgement. "I see you. I'm here. What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do." She looked back at him. He wasn't challenging her. He was just seeing her, again, that particular focused clarity that she both needed and found difficult to tolerate in moments when she was not quite ready to be fully seen. "If I don't pay it," she said slowly, "they lose the house." "Yes. And if they lose the house, they'll find somewhere to live." "Min-jae, I am not saying it would be easy." His voice was even. Not cold, not without feeling, just steady, the way he was always steady. "I am saying that if it's not the same as will die, they would face a consequence they created. That is not your failure." "They're my parents." "Yes. I can't watch them lose everything because I decided to stop." "You've been the only thing between them and every consequence for how long?" She didn't answer. 8 years, he said quietly. "At minimum. Because that's how long I've known you, and it was already happening when I met you." She looked at the carpet. "I know the number," he said. "I've known for a long time. I know what you've paid and what it's cost you, and I know you've never told me the full amount because you knew I'd—" He stopped, took a breath, let it out. "I have never asked you to stop. I've given you my opinion when you asked and kept it when you didn't. But I'm asking you now directly. When does it stop being helping and start being something else?" "Something else," she repeated. "Enabling." He said the word without flinching from it. "Naomi, you are not helping your father recover from a problem. You are paying for the problem to continue." The room felt very still. "I'll think about it," she said. And she could tell from the quality of his silence that he knew exactly what "I'll think about it" meant, and that it was not what he'd hoped she would say, and that he was choosing, again, as he always chose, to let her come to it herself rather than push her somewhere she'd resent being pushed. She paid the $112,000. She told herself it was the last time. It wasn't the last time. February brought Diane. Diane's crisis arrived differently than her father's. Loud, immediate, performed across 3 phone calls in a single Tuesday evening, with the escalating urgency of someone who had learned that volume was an effective replacement for patience. The situation with Diane involved a car, a series of credit cards, a lease on an apartment in River North that she had signed at the absolute outer edge of what her income could theoretically support if nothing ever went wrong, and then something had gone wrong. A job she'd left after what she described as a hostile work environment, and what Naomi suspected was closer to a personality conflict that Diane had not managed well, and the whole structure had collapsed simultaneously. "I don't have anywhere to go," Diane said on the 3rd call, her voice pitched at the frequency of genuine distress, which Naomi recognized and took seriously, even as she also recognized that Diane moved through genuine distress faster than most people moved through mild inconvenience. "You could stay with Mom and Dad temporarily." "Naomi, I'm not going back to that house. You know how they are. I can't." "Then I can look for I need the back rent covered. It's only 3 months. If I can get those 3 months covered, I can catch up. I just need—" "Diane." Naomi was standing in her kitchen again, in roughly the same spot she'd stood the night of the birthday dinner, same countertop, same cold surface under her palms. "How much is 3 months of back rent in your apartment in River North?" A pause. It's $6,000 a month." Naomi closed her eyes. $18,000. Plus the late fees, it's close to $22,000. For an apartment Diane had specifically chosen, Naomi remembered the conversation, remembered Diane sending her photos of the river view, the marble countertops, the floor-to-ceiling windows, because it was the kind of apartment that communicated something about who Diane felt she was or was becoming. "Diane," Naomi said very carefully, "I need you to hear what I'm going to say." "Okay." "I can help you find a place that's within your actual budget. I can help you make a plan. I cannot keep—" She stopped, started again. I can't cover an apartment that costs $6,000 a month when you don't have a job. Silence on the line. Then, so you're not going to help me? I just said, you said you'd help me find a place. That's not help, Naomi. I'm about to be evicted. I don't need you to help me search on Zillow. I know what you need. I'm telling you what I'm able to. Oh, that is such... Diane's voice shifted, became the voice she used when she felt cornered, clipped, and slightly contemptuous. You know what? It's fine. I know you have the money. I know you're choosing not to. That's correct, Naomi said. I'm choosing. Another silence. Different quality. Diane had not expected that answer. In the architecture of their relationship, Naomi eventually gave in. That was the fixed point around which everything else moved. Naomi saying I'm choosing had no established place in the structure. Wow, Diane said. Then quietly, with more hurt in it than anger, Min-jae put you up to this. Nobody put me up to anything. He's changed you. I don't know if you see it, but we all see it. Mom talks about it all the time. He's isolated you, Naomi. He's... Diane, stop. I'm serious. You never used to be like this. You were always the one who... I was always the one who paid. Her voice was level. She was surprised by how level it was. That's what you mean. I was always the one who paid. Diane didn't answer. I'll transfer you 2 months back rent, Naomi said. Not 3. 2. But I need you to be actively looking for another apartment this week, not River North, something that fits what you actually earn. Can you do that? Yeah. I'll send it tonight. She transferred $12,000 at 8:54 p.m. and then sat on her kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, for about 10 minutes before she got up. She didn't tell Min-jae about the transfer. She told herself she would explain it later, when she'd figured out how to explain it in a way that didn't sound like what it was. She never got the chance to find that framing, because Min-jae found the transfer himself. Not snooping. Not going through her accounts with suspicion. They shared a financial software account for household expenses, and he'd logged in to look at a property tax payment, and he'd seen the transfer listed, and he'd looked at it long enough to understand what it was. He didn't mention it that night or the next morning. He mentioned it on a Thursday evening in March, quiet, almost in passing, the way he sometimes said the most significant things, as if lowering the volume could reduce the impact. You sent money to Diane, he said. She was making tea. Her back was to him. Yes, she said, without telling me. It was my money. Naomi. Not anger, something more controlled and therefore, she thought, more serious. Look at me. She turned around. He was sitting at the kitchen table and he looked tired. Not physically tired. The other kind. The kind that accumulates over months of watching someone you love make a particular choice over and over and choosing every time not to intervene. Why didn't you tell me, he said. Because I knew what you'd say. Then you already knew what I thought. Knowing what you think and agreeing with it are different things. He was quiet for a moment. How much have you given them, total, this year? She looked at him. She thought about lying. She thought about redirecting. She thought about the dozen small framings she'd used over the years to make the numbers sound like something other than what they were. This year, she said, around 140. He didn't move. His expression didn't change in any dramatic way. But something behind his eyes shifted. Not surprise, she thought, but a kind of settling, a man who has been holding a number in his head and has just confirmed it. Since we've been married? He said. She didn't answer. Naomi. I don't know the exact number. Estimate. She looked at the kettle, at the window above the sink, at her own hands. Close to 700,000, she said. The kitchen was very quiet. $700,000, he said. Over 8 years, yes. He put both hands flat on the table, the same gesture she made on the counter when she needed something solid under her. He looked at his hands. He breathed in and out, once, deliberately. And they know, he said. Your parents. Diane. They know approximately how much. I don't think they know I've helped them. They know you've paid their debts for 8 years. Not a question. They know you have the capacity to produce money when they need it. They know you'll do it without forcing them to face what they've done. That's what they know. Min-jae, I'm not angry with you, he said. He looked up at her and she saw that this was true. He wasn't. I am telling you what's true. They are not in distress. They are in a pattern, and you are the thing that makes the pattern sustainable. She sat down across from him. If I stop, she said, my father loses that house. He might. My mother won't forgive me. She might not. Diane will manage. People manage. He reached across the table and took her hand, not gently exactly, but with a firm certainty, the way he held things he didn't intend to let go of. I need you to hear me. Not as your husband telling you what to do, just hear me. He waited until her eyes came to his. You are not the reason your family has money problems. You are the reason they don't feel them. Those are not the same thing. She looked at him. She felt the truth of it in the specific way you feel things that you've known for a long time and have been carrying at an angle so they don't cut you directly. I know, she said, quietly, meaning it. Then what's stopping you? And there it was. The question she'd been asking herself for 8 years and answering with transfers and silence and showing up at dinners where they laughed at her and paying bills they handed her and calling it love. I don't know how to stop being their person, she said, even if I wanted to. I don't know who I am in this family if I'm not the one who handles things. He looked at her for a long moment. You are my wife, he said. That's who you are. That's enough. She held on to his hand in the kitchen under the fluorescent light and didn't cry, because she never cried about this, and thought about whether it was enough, and thought about her father's gambling debts, and her mother's face in the restaurant, and Diane's voice on the phone saying he's isolated you, and somewhere underneath all of that, like a frequency she couldn't quite tune to, she felt something beginning to shift. Not yet, not all the way, but something. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday in April. Not from her father, not from Diane. From a number she didn't recognize, a 312 area code, and when she answered it was a man's voice, young, polite, the particular politeness of someone who has been professionally trained to deliver bad news without causing a scene. He identified himself as a representative from a credit monitoring service and asked if she was Naomi Carter. She said yes. He asked if she had recently opened a line of credit with a commercial lending institution for the amount of $450,000. She said no. A silence on his end. The sound of keys, of something being pulled up on a screen. Ms. Carter, he said, I'm looking at a credit application dated February 12th of this year, filed in your name, using your social security number, your business EIN, and your home address. The application was approved March 1st, and the funds were dispersed March 8th. Naomi stood very still. Where were the funds dispersed to? She said. He gave her a bank account number she had never seen before. She wrote it down. Her hand was steady. She was aware that her hand was steady in the specific way you become aware of your own physical reactions when some part of your brain has gone ahead into a territory the rest of you hasn't caught up to yet. I need to file a dispute, she said. Yes, ma'am. I can connect you with our fraud department. Please do that now. She was on hold for 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, she sat at her desk and she thought about her father's voice saying, we needed, in the careful way he said things he'd rehearsed. She thought about the account statements he'd sent her in February, the ones with the wire transfers to unfamiliar names. She thought about her EIN, her social security number, the documents she kept in a filing cabinet in her home office that she'd never thought to lock, because it had never occurred to her that the people with access to her home would use them against her. It had not occurred to her. It should have. She thought about Min-jae sitting across from her in the kitchen saying, you are the reason they don't feel them, and the specific terrible accuracy of that sentence, and how she'd heard it and understood it and gone back to what she was doing anyway. The fraud department representative came on the line. Naomi began to speak, and somewhere across the city, in a room she had never been allowed to see, her husband was about to receive a piece of information that would make all of his restraint, all of his patience, all of the years of silence he had maintained out of love for the woman who had asked him to wait, entirely, permanently, and without any possibility of return, beside the point. The fraud department representative's name was Kevin. She knew this because he introduced himself at the start of the call with the careful professionalism of someone who has been trained to humanize these conversations. And she held on to his name the way you hold on to small details when the larger picture is too large to process all at once. Kevin. He had a slight Midwestern accent, and he walked her through the dispute process with practiced patience, asking her to confirm information, reading back dates and figures, explaining the next steps in a tone calibrated to be reassuring without making promises. She answered every question. She confirmed every detail. She spelled her name and read back her social security number and confirmed her business. And described the filing cabinet in her home office where she kept those documents. And while she did all of this, her voice remained level, and her handwriting on the notepad in front of her remained legible, and her breathing stayed even, because she was in a mode she recognized from the worst moments of her professional life. The mode where the emergency is happening and the feelings about the emergency must wait in a separate room until the emergency has been addressed. Kevin told her the investigation could take between 30 and 90 days. He told her a freeze had been placed on the fraudulent line of credit. He told her she should file a report with the Chicago Police Department and that the fraud department would need a copy of that report to proceed. She wrote down everything. She thanked him. She hung up. Then she sat at her desk in the absolute silence of her office with the door closed and the notepad in front of her, and she looked at the bank account number she'd written down, the account the $450,000 had been dispersed to. And she picked up her pen and circled it very slowly, once, the way you mark something you're going to come back to. She opened her laptop. She spent 40 minutes on financial databases she had professional access to through her consulting work, cross-referencing the account routing number with institution records, following the chain of what was publicly traceable. She was not a forensic accountant. She was not an investigator. But she was a woman who had spent 15 years reading financial documents for a living, and she was very, very good at understanding what numbers were telling her, even when the person who created them had tried to make them hard to read. The account the money had gone to was a business account. The business was registered in Illinois. The registered agent was a name she didn't recognize, but the address on file for the business... She stopped. She read it again, then a third time. It was her parents' address on Halstead. She drove there herself. She did not call first. She was aware, somewhere in the functioning part of her brain that was still making rational decisions, that calling first would be the wrong move, that if she called first, the narrative would be assembled before she arrived, the explanations ready, the faces arranged. She needed the version of this that existed before anyone knew she was coming. She parked on the street. It was a Tuesday evening, cold, the kind of flat gray April cold that Chicago does in the weeks before spring fully commits to existing. She sat in the car for approximately 90 seconds, not to gather herself, but to make sure she was in the state she needed to be in, which was not angry, not panicked, not grieving. She needed to be clear. She needed to be the person who understood what she was looking at. She got out of the car and rang the doorbell. Her mother answered. Vivian Carter was dressed as she always dressed in her own home, carefully. It was a point of personal philosophy that you did not allow yourself to be caught looking unprepared. She had on a blouse Naomi recognized, earrings, her hair done. She looked at Naomi on the front step with the particular expression she reserved for unexpected arrivals. Not quite unwelcoming, not quite warm. "Naomi, you didn't call." "No," Naomi said. "Is Dad here?" A fractional pause. So small anyone else might have missed it. Naomi didn't miss it. "He's in the study. I need to talk to both of you." She stepped inside without being invited, which she had never done before, and her mother closed the door behind her with the careful quietness of a woman recalibrating. The house smelled the same as it always had. Her mother's particular candles, something cooking, or recently cooked. The underlying scent of a space that had been furnished all at once and hadn't changed since. Naomi walked through the front hall to the study without waiting, because she knew the house, and because she did not want to give either of them the time that a slower approach would provide. Her father was at his desk. He had the look of a man who had been watching something on his computer and closed it quickly. A slight adjustment in posture, a screen gone dark. "Naomi?" Genuine surprise, or a good version of it. "What are you doing here?" She stood in the doorway. Her mother came in behind her and stood slightly to the left, near the bookshelf, which positioned her in Naomi's peripheral vision, something Naomi noted without reacting to. "I got a call today," Naomi said, "from a credit monitoring service." Her father's face did something, a small thing, a tightening around the eyes that was not confusion. "Someone opened a line of credit in my name," she said, $450,000. The funds were disbursed to a business account. The business is registered at this address. The room was quiet. Harold, her mother said. Just his name. The way she said it told Naomi something she hadn't expected. Her mother had not known, or had not known all of it. The fear in her mother's voice was real, and it was pointed at her father rather than at Naomi, which meant the shape of whatever had happened here was not what she'd initially assumed. Her father stood up from the desk. Let me explain. I need you to tell me, Naomi said, keeping her voice completely even, whose idea this was when it was done and where the money is. Naomi, it's more complicated than I filed a fraud report with the credit bureau this afternoon, she said. A police report is the next step. I am here first because you're my parents, and I want to hear from you directly before this goes somewhere I can't stop it from going, so I need you to talk to me right now. Her father's face went through several things in rapid succession. The performance of wounded dignity, a flash of calculation, and underneath both of those something rawer and more frightened that he was not quite able to keep contained. He sat back down. He put his hands on the desk. I needed capital, he said, for the business. You don't have a business, Dad. I was starting one, a real one. There's an opportunity I've been looking at, a property development deal on the south side. The numbers made sense. I just needed the initial. You used my social security number. I was going to pay it back before you noticed. The deal was supposed to close in 60 days, and then, you used my social security number, she said again. Not louder. The same volume, the same tone, because she had learned from the most controlled man she knew that volume was not the instrument of authority. Precision was. My EIN, documents from my filing cabinet, in my home. The last two words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Her mother made a sound, not quite a word, a sharp exhale, and Naomi looked at her. Her mother's face had gone a color that Naomi associated with people who are understanding something they cannot undo the understanding of. Harold, her mother said again, different this time. You went into their house. Vivian, you went into her house and you took. She stopped, pressed her hand flat to her own chest. How did you get in? I had a key. From the leak last year, she gave us a key for. I gave you a key, Naomi said slowly, for a plumbing emergency. I know. When was this? Her father was quiet. When did you go into my house, Dad? February, he said, barely audible. February, while she'd been at work, while Min-jae had been, wherever Min-jae went during the days, the places she didn't ask about, the meetings that ran long and the calls he sometimes took in other rooms. While the brownstone in Lincoln Park had been sitting empty and locked with a key she'd given her father for a plumbing emergency 14 months ago and had not thought to ask for back. She thought about the filing cabinet in her home office. Unlocked. She had never locked it. She had never locked it because she lived in her home and her home was the one place she had believed herself to be completely safe. I need the key back, she said. He opened his desk drawer. He took out a key on a plain ring and placed it on the desk between them. She picked it up. Where's the money? She said. His eyes moved, just slightly. To the left, the direction of a man accessing something real rather than constructing something. Most of it is gone, he said. Gone where? The deal. It fell through last month. There were people I owed from before, from the. He stopped. From the gambling, she said. He flinched, an actual physical flinch, the whole upper body. I was paying off debts, he said, with the intention of starting clean. The property deal was going to be the reset. It was a real deal, Naomi. The guy I was working with, he had documentation. He took your money, she said. Silence. How much did he take? About $280. And the rest? Debts. Owed to people who were. I couldn't wait on them. She understood that sentence completely. She understood the particular category of people you could not wait on and the particular quality of urgency that came with owing them money. She understood it because she had seen the wire transfers in the February documents, the transfers to accounts with names that were clearly not names, the patterns that spoke a language she'd never been taught, but had come to read through proximity to her father's disasters. Harold. Her mother had moved away from the bookshelf. She was standing near the window now, with her arms crossed and her back partially turned, looking at nothing outside the glass. Harold, Do you understand what you've done? I'm handling it, Vivian. You have committed fraud. Her mother said the word with the precision of someone who had never thought they would need to say it about their own husband. Against our daughter. I was going to pay it back. Against our daughter who has given us... Her mother's voice cracked. Just once. She reassembled it quickly, the way she reassembled everything, pulling composure back around herself like a garment. Who has given us more than we had any right to ask for. Naomi watched her mother's profile. The jaw set, the eyes fixed on something outside the window, the working of something complicated and painful in the muscles of her face. This was not performance. Naomi had spent her entire life being able to tell the difference between her mother's genuine emotion and her mother's use of emotion as a tool, and what she was seeing now was genuine. It did not fix anything, but she registered it. I need to know, Naomi said, if there's anything else, any other accounts, anything else opened in my name, in my business name, anything. No, her father said. I need the truth. That's the truth, just the one. I swear to you, Naomi, just the one. She looked at him. She wanted to believe him. She also knew that wanting to believe someone and being able to trust them were not the same thing, and that she had spent 8 years confusing the two. I'm going to have an attorney reach out, she said. You'll need to cooperate fully with the investigation and with whatever the credit bureau requires. If you don't, I cannot. She stopped. Her voice was the only thing that had come close to breaking, and she brought it back under control by main force. I will file a complete police report, and I will not intervene on your behalf. Do you understand me? Naomi, do you understand me, Dad? He looked at her with the face of a man who is old and frightened and fully aware, for possibly the first time, of the precise dimensions of what he has done. Yes, he said. She left the key on the desk, the one he'd given back to her. She left it there because she realized as she was about to put it in her pocket that she didn't want it, that keeping it would make her responsible for it, and she was not willing to be responsible for another thing in this house. She walked back through the front hall. Her mother followed her to the front door. They stood for a moment on opposite sides of the threshold, her mother inside the house, Naomi on the step in the cold, and something passed between them that was not an apology and was not absolution and was not anything that had a specific name, but felt like the closest thing to honesty they had managed in years. I didn't know about the key, her mother said. I know, Naomi said. I knew about the gambling. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. I know that too. Her mother reached out, and for a moment Naomi thought she was going to be embraced, but her mother just put her hand on Naomi's arm briefly, a contact so unfamiliar in its gentleness that Naomi had to concentrate on not reacting to it. I'm sorry, her mother said. 2 words. Simple, quiet, none of the performance, just the words themselves. Naomi nodded once. She got in her car. She drove. She didn't go home. She drove for almost an hour through the city without a destination, taking turns that made no navigational sense, going south, then east, then looping back north on surface streets instead of the highway, the city unreeling around her in the particular way it does at night when you're moving through it without wanting to arrive anywhere. The lake appeared occasionally between buildings, flat and black and very large, and each time it appeared she felt something in her chest acknowledge it, the particular comfort of a body of water that doesn't care about any of this. She ended up parked on a street near Lincoln Square, engine running, heat on. She called her attorney. Daria Okonkwo had been Naomi's attorney for 6 years, a small firm, corporate and contracts primarily, but sharp and meticulous, and the kind of person Naomi trusted not because she was always right, but because she was always honest about when she wasn't sure. The call went to voicemail. It was evening. It was not an emergency in the physical sense. She left a detailed message, clear, chronological, giving Daria the relevant figures and asking for an urgent callback in the morning. Then she sat in the parked car and thought about what she had not yet done. She had not told Min-jae. She was going to have to tell Min-jae. The shape of that conversation had a weight she could feel from here, a specific gravitational pull. Not because he would be cruel. He would not be cruel. She had never once seen him be cruel to her. But because this conversation was going to require her to tell him things she had been protecting him from, and in doing so, confirm things he had already known and had been gentle enough not to force her to say. She drove home. I was awake. She didn't know why she expected otherwise. Min-jae slept lightly on the nights she wasn't home before 10, a fact she'd discovered in the first year of their marriage and had never quite decided how to feel about. He was in the kitchen when she came in, not doing anything, just sitting at the table with a glass of water, still dressed. He looked at her face when she came through the door, and whatever he saw there made him very still. "Sit down," he said. She sat. She told him everything. Beginning to end, no edits, no framings designed to soften the shape of it. The credit line, the account, the address, the conversation with her father, the money gone to the property deal. That wasn't a property deal, and to debts owed to people who did not extend patience as a professional practice. She told him about the key. When she said the part about the key, about her father having a key to their home, having been inside their home while they weren't there, something happened to Minji's face that she had never seen before. It lasted only a fraction of a second, like a door that opens and closes before you can see what's behind it. Then his face was still again, precisely still, the way a surface is still when something is moving very fast just underneath it. He did not speak for a long moment after she finished. "Our home," he said finally. Not a question. "Yes." He looked at his hands on the table. "He came into our home," he said, in the same even tone, "and took documents from your office." "Yes." "While we were not here." "Yes." He was quiet again. She watched him and said nothing. She had learned when to fill his silences and when to let them run, and this was a silence that needed to run. "The money," he said, "is gone. Most of it. What can be recovered? Daria's going to call tomorrow. If we can demonstrate fraud, which we can, the documentation is clear, the credit bureau and potentially the lender have exposure. It's not simple, and it won't be fast, but there's a path. And your father. And your father." She looked at the table. "He cooperates, or I file the full police report." "Naomi." His voice was so careful, so deliberate. "What do you want to happen to him?" She thought about it. Genuinely, in the way she hadn't let herself think about it during the drive or the conversation with her parents or the voicemail to Daria. "I don't want him in prison," she said. "I want it to stop. I want there to be a line drawn somewhere that he can see and feel that makes it actually stop." Min-jae nodded. "All right," he said. "I know you have opinions about— I told you my opinion, in the kitchen, months ago." He looked up at her. "I'm not going to tell you I told you so. That's not something I do." "I know. What I'm going to tell you is this." He placed both hands flat on the table, that gesture. "This ends here. Not because I'm telling you it ends, because you've seen what it costs. You've seen what they're willing to do. You know now." "Yes," she said, "I know." "Can you let it be enough? What you know now?" She thought about her mother's hand on her arm. "I'm sorry." The first real apology she could remember in 37 years. She thought about her father's face, old, frightened, the precise dimensions of what he had done. She thought about a filing cabinet in her own home, in the place she thought she was safe. "Yes," she said. "I think I can." He nodded. He stood up, came around the table, and stood behind her and put his hands on her shoulders, and she felt the weight and warmth of them and closed her eyes. "Go to sleep," he said. "I'll be there in a moment." She went upstairs. She heard him moving in the kitchen below, quietly, the sounds of a man who is doing something purposeful but not urgent. She lay in the dark and listened to the small sounds of the house and thought she should feel worse than she did, and couldn't figure out whether the relative quiet inside herself was some form of shock or some form of relief. She was asleep before he came upstairs. She didn't know what calls he made that night. She found out later, much later, after everything else had happened, in a conversation that Min-jae initiated himself, precisely and without drama, because he was a man who believed in accounting for his own actions, that he had made 3 calls between midnight and 2 a.m. on the night she told him about the key. She didn't know to whom. He didn't offer that information, and she didn't ask, because she had been married to him long enough to understand that there were territories of his life where the less she knew, the better protected she was. And she had made a private peace with that years ago, in a way that might have looked like denial, but felt, from the inside, more like trust. What she did know, and noticed, was that things began to move differently after that night. Her father's gambling debts, the accounts she'd seen in the wire transfers, the names that weren't names, stopped appearing in the statements she requested copies of. The pressure her father had described, the urgency, the people who couldn't wait, seemed to simply cease. Not because they were paid off in any way she could trace, and not because they had decided to be patient. They stopped because something else had happened first. She did not ask what. What she focused on instead was the work that was hers to do. Daria called back the next morning at 8:45, already having done a preliminary review based on the voicemail. The fraud case was, as Naomi had assessed, documentable and pursuable. The lender's exposure was real. The credit bureau's investigation was already underway. The path to recovering the fraudulent credit line's impact on her business credit was clear, if not fast. The path to recovering the money her father had lost to the property deal and the debts, that path was narrower. How much of the $450 do you think is actually recoverable? Naomi asked. Realistically? Daria's voice was the voice of a woman who had stopped softening financial realities years ago because clients always preferred the truth to the surprise. If your father cooperates, if we can identify the individuals he paid, if the fraud case establishes clear liability, maybe 60 cents on the dollar, over 18 months minimum. And if he doesn't cooperate, then we pursue it differently, but it takes longer and costs more, and the recovery percentage drops. A pause. Naomi, I have to ask you, do you want to pursue criminal charges against your father directly? The question sat in the air. I want to pursue the recovery, she said. I want the debt removed from my credit record. I want the business credit cleaned. I want the lender made whole in a way that doesn't cost me money I shouldn't have to spend. As for my father personally, she stopped. Let's see what Daria can get him to agree to first. Understood. She went to work. She sat with Priya and went through the business accounts, checking every line, every authorization, every access point. She spent 3 days doing what she should have done years ago, pulling together a complete financial picture of what she had given her family over the past 8 years, not in the rough estimates she'd given Minjai, but in the precise documented reality of every transfer, every payment, every mortgage installment, every debt she'd cleared. The number, when she finished, was $723,000. She printed it and put it in a folder and looked at it. It was not an abstraction anymore. It was a number on a page. It was 8 years of her work, her clients, her firm, her decisions, her quiet erosion, given to people who had called her an ATM and laughed, who had used the word foreigners about her husband, who had come into her home with a key she'd given in good faith and walked through her private space and opened a cabinet and taken what was inside it. She sat with the folder for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called a number she had not called in several months. It rang twice. Marcus, she said when her brother picked up, I need to tell you something. It's going to take a while. Her brother, who had moved to Atlanta years ago and maintained his careful distance with the focused discipline of a man who had learned his lesson early, said, Okay, I'm listening. And Naomi began to talk. She was still on the phone with Marcus when her office door opened without a knock. Something that had never happened in 6 years, something that violated every protocol Priya maintained with professional ferocity. And Priya put her head in with an expression Naomi had never seen on her face before. Fear. Not the professional anxiety of a schedule conflict or a client complaint, something rawer. She was holding her phone and her face was pale, and she was looking at Naomi with the specific focus of someone who needs to say something important and hasn't yet calculated how. Marcus, Naomi said, I have to call you back. She hung up before he responded. What happened? She said. Priya came all the way into the office and closed the door. There's a man downstairs, she said. He came in about 10 minutes ago. He said he's from the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. She held out her phone, showing Naomi a photograph, a badge, credentials, a name. He has a subpoena, Naomi, for all business financial records going back 7 years. Naomi's blood went cold. Not the slow cold of comprehension, the fast cold of someone who has just understood that the thing they were worried about is actually the smaller thing, and the thing behind it is larger than anything they prepared for. Did he say what the investigation is related to? She said. Priya's face did something complicated. He said it's related to a federal inquiry. She paused. Into Kang Min-jae. The room was very still. Naomi heard her own breathing. She heard the sound of the city outside her window, traffic, a siren somewhere east. The ordinary noise of Chicago going about its day, completely indifferent to the fact that the ground had just shifted under everything she thought she understood about her life. She thought about a man who had told her he was in hospitality, who had meetings she wasn't allowed to know about, who had made 3 phone calls between midnight and 2 a.m., and her father's debts had disappeared like smoke, who had once said, in the car in that Chicago winter gray, "Your way has not worked," with the precision of a man who had other ways available to him and had been choosing, out of love, not to use them. She thought about the life she had built next to his, the brownstone, the firm, the years of quiet partnership, and she thought about the question she had never let herself ask, because some part of her had always known that asking it would require her to do something with the answer. She stood up. "Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes," she said. Priya left. Naomi stood alone in her office, the folder with $723,000 still on her desk, and she understood, with the specific clarity of a person who has just run out of the space in which they were able to avoid knowing something, that she was about to walk downstairs and that whatever happened in that conversation would determine not just her own future, but the shape of everything that came after, and that she was going to do it without the luxury of preparation, without the ability to call Minjai first, without anyone to hand this to or ask to handle it, and that the woman who walked down those stairs was going to have to be a version of herself she hadn't fully met yet. She picked up her phone. She put it down again. She picked up the folder, and she walked to the door. The man downstairs was not what she expected. She had constructed him in the elevator ride down, middle-aged, bureaucratic, the particular energy of a government employee who has learned to deliver bad news with administrative neutrality. What she found instead was a man in his early 40s, lean, dark suit, no tie, with the kind of stillness that was not bureaucratic at all. He was standing near the reception desk, and he was not looking at his phone or at the art on the walls or at anything in particular. He was simply standing, watching the elevator doors, and when they opened and she stepped out, he looked at her with eyes that had already assessed the lobby, the exits, the positions of everyone in the room, and moved on. She knew that kind of stillness. She had lived next to it for 3 years. "Ms. Carter," he said. He had credentials out before she reached him, a leather holder, badge, his name. Special Agent Daniel Reyes, FBI Financial Crimes Division, not IDFPR. Priya had misread the badge or had been told something slightly different from what was printed on it. She looked at the credentials. She looked at him. "My attorney isn't present," she said. "You're not under arrest, Ms. Carter. You're not a target of the investigation. I'm here to serve a subpoena, and if you're willing, to ask you a few questions. You're absolutely entitled to have counsel present for any questions." "Then I'll have counsel present," she said. Something crossed his face. Not frustration, something more like respect. The fractional acknowledgement of a person who has said the right thing. "That's your right," he said. "I'd like to schedule that conversation as soon as possible. In the meantime," he produced an envelope. The subpoena covers business financial records for Naomi Carter Consulting, going back 7 years. All transactions, client records, accounts receivable and payable. She took the envelope. "What is the investigation into?" she said. "I can't discuss the specifics. You said my husband's name upstairs. To my assistant." She kept her voice level. "You came to my place of business, and you said my husband's name. I'm asking you what you're looking for." He looked at her for a moment. Behind him, through the glass front of the lobby, Chicago moved in its ordinary afternoon rhythm, cabs and pedestrians and the light going silver-gray with cloud cover. "We believe there may be connections between certain financial flows through your business accounts and organizations under investigation," he said. Careful. Legal. The kind of sentence that technically says something while strategically saying as little as possible. "My business accounts," she repeated. "Yes. You're telling me someone may have used my business as a financial conduit." A pause. "That's one possibility the investigation is examining." She stood very still. She thought about her father in the study. The property deal that wasn't a property deal. $450,000 drawn in her name and moved to an account registered at her parents' address. She thought about the wire transfers in the statements from February, the names that weren't names, the accounts she couldn't identify. She thought about Minji's 3 phone calls. She thought about her father's debts disappearing. "I'll have my attorney contact you by 9 a.m. tomorrow," she said. "I appreciate that." He produced a card. She took it. He held her gaze for one beat longer than professionally necessary, long enough to communicate something that wasn't in his official language. Ms. Carter, if there's anything you want to tell me voluntarily, before this goes further, it would be in your interest to do that sooner rather than later. She put the card in her jacket pocket. Good afternoon, Agent Reyes, she said. She turned and walked back to the elevator and pressed the button and stood with her back to the lobby until the doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed. She was alone. She looked at her own reflection in the brushed steel of the elevator door. She called Min-jae. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. His voicemail message was 8 seconds long, just his name and a tone, nothing else. Call me, she said. Now, please. She was at her desk trying to read the subpoena language when he called back. 40 minutes had passed. 40 minutes during which she had read the same paragraph of legal text approximately 9 times without absorbing it, during which Priya had brought her coffee she didn't drink, during which she had stared at the window and thought in circles with the focused unproductivity of a mind that is running too fast in a space too small. His name on her screen. She answered before the first ring finished. Where are you? She said. A half-second pause. A meeting. What happened? FBI, she said. At my office. Financial crimes. A subpoena for 7 years of business records. She paused. Min-jae? They said your name. Silence on the line. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of a man who has received information he was expecting to receive and is now deciding how to respond. Are you still at the office? He said. Yes? Stay there. I'll come to you. Min-jae? Naomi. The way he said her name. That specific wait. Stay at the office. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up. She put the phone face down on the desk. She thought about the man at the dry cleaner who had not smiled immediately, who had picked up an old woman's dropped ticket with no performance, who had asked, on their 3rd date, how the situation with her mother was going. She thought about who he actually was. She had always known there was a version of the answer to that question that she hadn't let herself look at directly. She had arranged her knowing of him the way you arrange furniture to manage the light in a room, not to block it out completely, just to keep it from hitting you directly. I was a man with resources that didn't fully add up to restaurants and property investments. He was a man whose phone calls sometimes had the quality of commands. He was a man whose stillness, which she loved, which she had always experienced as a form of safety, she now understood had other applications. The most feared man in Chicago, someone had once called him, at a dinner party, in a context she'd filed away as a joke. She had filed it as a joke. 23 minutes after she hung up, Min-jae walked through the door of her office. He was still in the clothes he'd been wearing when he left that morning. Dark, precise, the way he always dressed, as if he had decided long ago that appearance was a form of communication and had settled on one message and never deviated. He came in, closed the door, and sat in the chair across from her desk. He looked at her. She looked at him. Tell me, he said. She told him everything, the same way she'd told him about her father, beginning to end, no edits. Reyes. The badge. Financial crimes. The language about financial flows and business accounts, and the word conduit. The 40 minutes of waiting. The look he'd given her before she walked away. When she finished, Min-jae sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking at a point on the desk between them. The subpoena, he said. She slid it across the desk. He read it. She watched his eyes move through it, not fast, not hurried, the reading of a man who has encountered legal documents before and understands them. When he finished, he placed it back on the desk, precisely where it had been. Minji, she said. Yes. I need you to tell me what they're going to find. He looked up from the desk. He looked at her face for a long moment. She held his gaze and did not fill the silence. In your business account specifically, he said carefully, they will find normal business transactions. Your firm is clean. You have nothing to be concerned about from your own records. But, he breathed in, out. They are not only interested in your records, he said. They're interested in you. Yes. How long have they been interested in you? A pause. This specific inquiry, approximately 4 months. The broader, longer. She leaned back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, just one moment, then back at him. "What are you?" she said. "Not who are you, what?" He held her gaze. He did not look away, and he did not perform anything. No guilt, no shame, no defensive posture. He just looked at her with the same focused clarity he had always looked at her with, the expression she'd spent 3 years learning and had thought she understood. "I manage operations," he said. "I manage people and resources, and I make certain things happen and prevent certain other things from happening. In Chicago and in some adjacent territories. I have done this for a long time." "For who?" she said. "For an organization that does not have a name you would recognize, but that has relationships you would recognize the effects of." "The Korean community," she said. "Partly." "Min-jae." Her voice was quiet, not shaking. Quiet in the way that is the opposite of small, the quiet of something with mass. "Are you telling me you run organized crime operations in this city?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. The words sat between them like something physical. She breathed in, out. "The restaurants," she said. "The hospitality." "Real," he said. "Profitable, also useful for other purposes." "The meetings." "Yes." "The calls you take in other rooms." "Yes." "The night my father's debts disappeared." She watched his face when she said this. Nothing moved on it. "The people he owed money to, who couldn't wait, they stopped. Because of you." "Because I spoke with certain people," he said, "and the situation was resolved." "Did you hurt anyone?" "No." Direct. No hesitation. "Did you threaten anyone?" A pause that was not quite as fast. "I made certain people understand that there were consequences for continuing to pursue a line of collection against a member of my family." A member of my family. Her father. Harold Carter, who had come into their home with a key and opened her filing cabinet, who had committed fraud in her name, who was a member of Min-jae's family by the fact of being her father, and for no other reason. And Min-jae had made phone calls on his behalf anyway. She pressed both palms flat on her desk. "The FBI," she said. "What do they actually have?" "Transaction records, patterns. They have been building a case around certain financial relationships for approximately 2 years. Your name appears because—" He stopped, his jaw tightened just slightly. "Because someone identified you as a potential pressure point. Someone. Within their investigation. Someone gave them my name specifically." "Yes." She leaned forward. "Who?" He was quiet. "Min-jae. Who gave them my name?" He looked at her, and she saw something in his face that she had not seen there before, something that did not fit the architecture she'd built of him. It was not anger. It was not cold calculation. It was something closer to the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and is about to put it down somewhere he cannot pick it up again. "A man named Park Sung-ho," he said. "He was associated with my operations. Previously. Previously. We had a disagreement. Earlier this year, he is no longer in that position. And he went to the FBI. He went to the FBI." She stood up. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out at the city. The lake was not visible from here, but she knew its direction. East, always east, the flat black water that didn't care about any of this. "They're going to come at me," she said, "to get to you." "That is their strategy, yes. They think if they put enough pressure on my business, my finances, my name, I'll give them something usable." "Yes. And if I don't cooperate, they will continue to build their case through other means. Your records will show them nothing because there is nothing to show. Your business is clean. They know this. The subpoena is partially procedural and partially pressure." She turned around. "So what's the actual play here?" she said, "from where they're standing, if my records are clean." He looked at her steadily. "The play is that they hope you don't know your records are clean. The play is that they sit across from you with Daria present, and they say certain things and they watch your face, and they hope you know something you're afraid of, and then they offer you something in exchange for that something. They're going to offer me a deal. They're going to imply that a deal is available. Yes." She looked at him. "And is it?" she said. "Is there a deal that would—" "Don't," he said. Just that word. She looked at him for a long moment. "Min-jae." "Whatever they offer you," he said, and his voice had dropped, become something quieter and more direct than she'd heard from him before. is not worth what it costs. I'm telling you this not as your husband. I'm telling you this as a man who has watched people take those deals, and I know what comes after. I know what it does to a person to carry that. You are not built for that. You don't get to decide what I'm built for. No, he said. I don't. Silence. Then let me ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer me honestly, not carefully. Honestly. Yes. Is there anything in our life, anything in our home, our finances, our history as a married couple, that connects me to what you do? Not theoretically, actually. He held her gaze. No, he said. You're certain. I have been certain of that since before I asked you to marry me. I made specific, deliberate choices to ensure that your life and my operations never intersected. Not because I didn't trust you, because I would not put you in that position. She studied his face. She had always been able to read him, not completely, not the territory he kept closed, but the surface he showed her. It was honest now. It was the most honest she had ever seen it. Then why, she said, does the FBI have my name? Because Park decided that disrupting my personal life was the most effective way to destabilize my professional one. His voice had an edge in it that she recognized was the most anger she was going to see from him in this conversation. Controlled, directed inward, the anger of a man who has made a mistake he cannot undo. He calculated correctly that you were the one person who could unsettle me. I was not wrong about that. She absorbed this. She thought about a man she'd never met who had identified her as a weapon to use against her husband. She thought about what that said about how she was perceived, not as an independent person, not as a businesswoman or an individual with her own life, but as a pressure point, a vulnerability, a weakness. The word landed inside her like something sharp. I am not your weakness, she said. He looked at her with an expression she could not fully name. I know that. Then stop making decisions that treat me like one. Stop making calls in other rooms to fix things you think will unsettle me and deciding what I know and don't know based on what you think I can handle. She crossed to the desk. She put her hands on it and leaned toward him. I have been handling things my entire life. I handled my family's disasters for 8 years without asking you for help. I handled this fraud case today, this morning, alone. I walked downstairs and faced a federal agent alone because I couldn't reach you. So don't sit there and tell me I'm not built for something. He didn't look away. He didn't defend himself. He sat in her chair in her office and looked at her with the expression of a man receiving something he knew he deserved. You're right, he said. I need to know, she said. Going forward, I need to know what I'm actually inside of. Not everything. I understand there are things that are better for me not to know in detail. But the shape of it, the actual shape. Yes, he said. All right. And I need you to understand something. She pulled back, stood straight. If I go into that meeting with Daria and Reyes, and I will go because there is no version of this where I hide, I go in there as myself. Not as your wife. Not as a pressure point, as Naomi Carter. And whatever they have or don't have, I answer for myself and nothing else. That's exactly what you should do, he said. I know it is. She looked at him. I'm not asking your permission. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his face shifted. Not softened, exactly, but changed. The way a thing changes when it's seen clearly and stops pretending to be anything other than what it is. No, he said. I know you're not. She called Daria from the office at 4:15. She was on the phone for 45 minutes, walking Daria through the subpoena, the conversation with Reyes, and everything Min-jae had told her, all of it, without omission, because Daria was her attorney and attorney-client privilege existed for exactly this kind of moment. When she finished, Daria was quiet for a long 5 seconds. Okay, Daria said. Here is where we are. Your business records are clean, if what your husband says is accurate, and I'm going to need to verify that myself. But if it is, then the subpoena is exactly what he said, pressure and procedure. They want to see if you react. They want to see if you know something. I don't know operational specifics, Naomi said. I know the general shape of what he does. I don't have names, locations, transactions, anything evidentiary. Then you have nothing to give them. Correct. And you're not willing to attempt to provide anything even if you had it. Correct. All right. Daria's voice had the quality it got when she was thinking fast, assembling things. I'm going to request the meeting for Friday. That gives me 3 days to go through your records myself, front to back, confirm the clean picture before we walk in there. In the meantime, Naomi, you understand that if there's anything you haven't told me, anything at all, you tell me now. Not Friday. Now. I've told you everything. Okay. Daria. She paused. Is this survivable? The business? My name? A pause on Daria's end that was not long but was long enough. If your records are what you say they are, yes. This is survivable. It's not comfortable and it's not fast, but it's survivable. Another pause. What concerns me more is whether the FBI is the only front this is going to come at you from. Naomi looked out her office window. What do you mean? I mean that if someone specifically identified you as a pressure point against your husband, they didn't only go to the FBI. They went to the FBI because that's the most official route. But people who operate the way your husband operates, when they have an enemy who is using personal relationships as leverage. She stopped. How is your security situation at home? Naomi had not thought about this. She had been thinking about subpoenas and credit lines and her father's filing cabinet and the shape of Min Jae's true professional life. And she had not thought about the most direct version of what having an enemy meant. I don't know, she said. Talk to your husband tonight, Daria said, about that specifically. She left the office at 6:30. Min Jae's car was outside, not his driver's car but his own, the black sedan. He drove himself on the occasions when he was handling something he preferred to keep close. He was behind the wheel. He had waited 2 hours in the parking structure across the street without telling her he was waiting. She got in. Daria says we need to talk about security, she said. I know, he said. It's already handled. Min Jae? I have 2 people on the building starting tonight. The brownstone it has been addressed for some time. I updated certain arrangements last night. Last night. While she slept, listening to the small sounds of the house, he had been making arrangements. Park Sung-ho, she said, is he a physical threat? Min Jae's hands were on the wheel. He wasn't driving yet. He looked forward through the windshield at the concrete of the parking structure, the painted lines on the ground, the industrial lighting that made everything look slightly unreal. He is a man who has decided that the best way to neutralize me is to use my personal life, Min Jae said. Whether that means the FBI or other means depends on how the FBI approach develops. So possibly. I am not going to allow anything to happen to you, he said. That's not what I asked. Naomi, is he a physical threat, yes or no? He was quiet for one beat. Potentially, he said. Yes. She absorbed this. She sat in the passenger seat of her husband's car in a parking structure in downtown Chicago with a federal subpoena in her bag and a fraud case in progress and $723,000 documented in a folder on her desk, and a man she had been married to for 3 years, whom she was only now seeing in full. And she thought about who she was in all of this. Not who she had been. Not the woman who swallowed things and kept going. Not the family ATM. Not the one who handled everything quietly. Not the person who said, please, they're still my family and meant it and paid for meaning it. Who she was now. She thought about her mother's hand on her arm on the doorstep, the first real apology she could remember. She thought about her brother Marcus picking up the phone and saying, I'm listening. She thought about Daria's voice saying, this is survivable. She thought about Min Jae across her office desk saying, you're right without argument, without defense, looking at her clearly. She thought about what it cost him to sit in that chair and say that. Drive, she said. He looked at her. Take me home, she said. We have things to figure out, and we're going to figure them out together. But I need to get out of this parking structure first. He put the car in gear. They pulled out onto the street, and the city opened up around them. All that complicated, layered, beautiful, dangerous city. And Naomi looked at it through the windshield and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not safe. Not comfortable. Not the false quiet of a woman who has decided not to look at the thing in the corner of the room. Ready. She felt ready. And 2 miles north, in an office she had never been inside, a man named Park Sung-ho was looking at a phone call log showing a missed connection to someone inside Min Jae's organization. A call that had been supposed to confirm something, a plan that was supposed to have already been set in motion. And frowning at the silence coming back from the other end, not understanding yet what the silence meant, not knowing yet that something had shifted tonight, that the woman he had identified as a vulnerability had spent the day doing exactly the opposite of what he'd expected, that she had walked downstairs to face a federal agent alone and come back up again, that she had sat across from her own husband and demanded the truth and received it, that she had said drive with the voice of someone who has stopped managing a situation and started moving through it, and that the pressure point had become something else entirely. The brownstone felt different that night. Not physically different, same rooms, same furniture, same particular smell of the place that was half her candles and half something she'd never been able to identify that she associated purely with the feeling of being home. But the quality of the air inside it had changed, the way air changes before weather, a pressure shift that the body registers before the mind catches up. Min-jae had spoken briefly on the phone in the car on the way back. One call, 2 sentences in Korean she didn't understand, and then silence for the rest of the drive. When they came inside, there were 2 men she had never seen before stationed in a car across the street. She noticed them because Min-jae noticed them, a small nod through the windshield before he cut the engine, the acknowledgement of someone checking that an arrangement is in place. She noticed, and she said nothing. Inside, Min-jae made tea without asking if she wanted any. It was something he did in the moments when he needed to do something with his hands. She'd understood this early, that the tea was not about the tea. She sat at the kitchen table and watched him move through the familiar motions and thought about how many times she had sat in this kitchen and not known what she now knew, and tried to calculate what that meant for the years behind her. She couldn't. The math was too strange. The life was still the same life, the man was still the same man. He had simply become more fully himself in her understanding of him, and she was still deciding what to do with that. He set the cup in front of her and sat across the table. "Park Sung-ho," she said. "Tell me what happened between you." He wrapped both hands around his own cup. "He was my second, for 6 years. He managed certain operations in the Northwest Territories. There are relationships there with distribution networks that require specific handling. He was good at it. He understood how to manage relationships that were complicated. But he began taking money, not dramatically. Carefully, over time, in amounts he calculated would go unnoticed. They did go unnoticed for approximately 8 months. He paused. When I found out, I removed him from the position and gave him the choice to repay what he'd taken or face consequences. What kind of consequences? Min-jae looked at her. He held the look long enough to communicate without detailing. He chose a third option, he said. He went to the FBI. He presented himself as a cooperative witness in exchange for immunity and told them everything he knew about my operations, with the specific addition of your name as someone I was financially and personally dependent on. He lied, she said, about the financial part. Yes. He knew our finances were separate. He told them you were the operational money source because he calculated it would be believed and because he stopped. Because it would take longer to disprove than to damage, she said. Yes. She drank her tea. It was too hot, but she drank it anyway, the slight burn on her tongue, something real to focus on. What does he actually know, she said, that the FBI can use? Names, some locations, transaction patterns from his period of involvement. Nothing current. I changed structures when I removed him. But historical information that, handled correctly by federal prosecutors, could form the basis of a serious case. How serious? A pause. Significant. She set the cup down. Are you going to prison, Min-jae? He met her eyes. In 3 years of marriage, she had asked him things that were difficult, and he had always answered with precision, not softening the edges. He did not soften them now. I don't know, he said. That is the honest answer. It depends on what Park has documented. It depends on what the investigation has built independent of him. It depends on decisions that will be made in the next weeks that I have some but not complete control over. But it's possible. Yes, it's possible. She looked at the table between them. The grain of the wood, the faint circular mark from a cup set down without a coaster months ago that she'd never quite managed to buff out. I need to know one more thing, she said. Ask. The people you've hurt, in the course of what you do. She looked up. I'm not asking for a list. I'm asking you. Is it the kind of thing I'll eventually find out about in a courtroom or a newspaper that I can't come back from? He held her gaze and she could see him weighing it, not calculating a lie but weighing the true answer, deciding how much precision was owed. I have authorized force, he said carefully, in situations where force was the appropriate response. I have not ordered anything that could not be argued as proportionate within the context of the world I operate in. Whether a jury would accept that argument, he stopped. I don't know. Proportionate, she said. Yes. Within the context. Yes. She breathed out through her nose. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay. It doesn't mean I'm all right with it, she said. It means I'm hearing what you're telling me, and I'm not going to pretend you're someone different than you are. I know the difference. Good. She picked up her cup again, and they sat in the kitchen in the quiet of the house with the two men in the car across the street and the city outside going about its enormous and different life. And she thought about the woman she had been at the beginning of the night walking downstairs to meet a federal agent, and she thought about who she was on this side of all the things that had been said in the last several hours. And she decided, not dramatically, but with the practical certainty of someone who has run out of time for anything else, that she was the same person. Different information, same person. That would have to be enough to work with. Daria spent Thursday inside Naomi's business records. All of them. Every file, every account, every transaction, going back 7 years, pulled from the firm's accounting software and the business bank accounts and the client billing system. She arrived at the office at 7 a.m. with 2 associates, and they worked through the day with the focused precision of people who understand that the quality of their preparation is the quality of their client's outcome. Naomi worked in the conference room to give them her office. She had client calls, deliverables due, the ordinary machinery of a consulting firm that did not stop because its owner's personal life had become a federal matter. She answered emails. She took calls. She spoke to Priya about rescheduling a site visit that conflicted with the Friday meeting. She did all of this with the functioning part of herself that had been running on its own reliable engine for 15 years, the part that knew how to keep going. At 4 p.m., Daria knocked on the conference room door and came in and sat down. It's clean, she said. 7 years front to back. Revenue sources are documented and legitimate. Every client is traceable. No anomalous deposits, no irregular outflows, nothing that reads as anything other than a consulting firm with a very good year-over-year growth curve. She put her hands flat on the table. Naomi, your business is genuinely one of the cleanest I've looked at. Naomi nodded. He told the truth, Daria said, meaning Min Jae, and not quite making it a question. He told the truth, Naomi confirmed. Okay. Daria looked at her for a moment in the way she sometimes did. The look of a woman who has processed information professionally and is momentarily allowing herself to process it personally as well. Tomorrow's going to be uncomfortable. Reyes is good at his job. He's going to probe the edges of what you know about your husband's activities, and he's going to phrase things in ways that are designed to make you uncertain. You stay inside what you actually know. You don't extrapolate. You don't fill in silences with guesses. You don't let him walk you into characterizing things you don't have direct knowledge of. I know, Naomi said. I'll be there. I know. Daria gathered her papers. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, she said, not turning around fully, you handled yourself well yesterday, the way you talked to Reyes, the call to me. You didn't panic. That matters. I've had practice not panicking, Naomi said. Daria nodded once, as if this were the answer she expected, and left. The meeting with Reyes was in a federal building on South Dearborn, a conference room with no windows, and a table that was slightly too large for the number of people in it, which Naomi understood was deliberate. Reyes had a colleague with him, a woman who introduced herself as Agent Torres and said very little for the first hour, which also seemed deliberate. Naomi sat with Daria on one side of the table. She wore the cream blazer. She had decided this the night before without quite deciding it. She'd opened the closet and taken it off the hanger and laid it on the chair, and in the morning she'd put it on. The blazer she'd been trying to retrieve from the dry cleaner the day she met Min Jae. It seemed, obscurely, like the right armor. Reyes was professional. He was, as Daria had promised, good at his job. He moved through questions about her business with a conversational quality that was designed to feel like dialogue rather than interrogation, pausing to acknowledge her answers, sometimes agreeing, building a rhythm that was easy to fall into without noticing that the rhythm itself was a tool. She noticed. She answered what she knew. She said, "I don't know," when she didn't know, which was more often than Reyes clearly expected. She said, "I'm not sure what you mean by that," when he phrased things in ways that implied connections she couldn't verify. She said, "That's not information I have," and held the silence after it without filling it. Daria intervened twice. Once when Reyes moved toward a question that implied operational knowledge Naomi couldn't have. Once when Torres asked a question about specific dates that had the shape of a trap, a date Naomi would only know if she'd been present for something she had not been present for. At the 90-minute mark, Reyes set down his pen. "Ms. Carter," he said, in a different register. "Less interview, more direct. I want to be candid with you about where we are." "All right," she said. "We have a cooperating witness who has provided detailed testimony about your husband's operations. That testimony is substantial. The case we're building is not speculative." He paused. "Your husband is going to be indicted. I want you to understand that as a factual matter, not a pressure tactic." She looked at him. She kept her face where it was. "What I'm offering you today," he continued, "is an opportunity to protect yourself from what comes next. Not because we think you're culpable, your records confirm you're not, but because people adjacent to federal prosecutions often find that their professional and financial lives are disrupted regardless of their personal culpability. Investigations are public. Associations are public. You're telling me my name will appear in the coverage regardless," she said. "I'm telling you that cooperative witnesses receive significant consideration in how they are characterized in public proceedings." "And what would cooperation look like?" she said. Daria put a hand on the table. Not on Naomi's arm, just on the table. A signal. "Whatever you know about your husband's operations," Reyes said. "Conversations. People you've met. Locations you're aware of. Anything that gives context to our existing evidence." She looked at him. She thought about Minji sitting across her desk saying, "Whatever they offer you is not worth what it costs." She thought about him in the kitchen at midnight saying, "You are my wife. That's who you are. That's enough." She thought about him telling her the truth, all of it, the actual shape of it, when she asked directly. She thought about 3 years of a man who had listened to her the way nobody in her life had ever listened to her. She thought about what it would feel like to be the person who handed him to the people sitting across this table. She thought about it with total clarity, for several seconds, looking at Reyes's face. "I have nothing to provide," she said. "I've answered your questions about my business fully and accurately. My records speak for themselves. I don't have information about my husband's professional activities that rises to the level you're describing." She paused. "If the investigation produces an indictment, my husband will have counsel, and the process will proceed as the process proceeds. I won't be a part of it on either side." Reyes looked at her for a long moment. "You understand what you're saying," he said. "Completely," she said. He nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man adjusting his assessment of something. "We may need to speak again as the investigation develops," he said. "My attorney's contact information is on file," she said. She and Daria left the building at 12:47 p.m. On the sidewalk outside, the April air had finally decided to be warmer, genuinely warmer, the first day that actually felt like spring was committed. Naomi stood on the sidewalk and took a breath of it. "That's the right call," Daria said beside her. "I know," Naomi said. "It might get harder before it gets easier." "I know that too." Daria looked at her. "You're going to be all right." Naomi looked down Dearborn at the city going about its life, all that ordinary, complicated motion. "Yeah," she said, "I think I am." The indictment came 6 weeks later. Minjae told her the morning it was filed, before it became public, sitting at the kitchen table in the early light, with his hands around a cup of coffee. He wasn't drinking. He told her the charges, the counts, the name of the lead prosecutor. He told her his attorney believed there was a defensible position on several of the counts and a harder road on others. He told her it was going to be public within hours and that she should expect press. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "What do you need from me today?" He looked at her. The expression on his face in that moment was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Not gratitude, not relief, not the performed emotion of a man who had expected something different. It was simpler than any of those things. It was the face of a man who has been seen. "I need you to go to work," he said. "I need you to do what you do. I need the press to see you going in and out of your building like it's any other day, because you are not hiding and you are not afraid and you have done nothing wrong." "That's it?" "That's everything," he said. She went to work. The press was there. Not many, not yet. A small cluster outside her building, one camera, two reporters with phones out. They asked questions when she came out of the car. She walked through them without breaking stride, looking forward, saying nothing. Inside, Priya had flowers on the reception desk. Not consolation flowers, bright ones, loud ones, yellow and orange and deeply unnecessary, the flowers of a person who decided unilaterally that the day required something assertive. Naomi stopped at the desk and looked at them. "Don't," Priya said preemptively. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were about to say it's too much." "It's a little much." "It's exactly much," Priya said. "Your 9 o'clock is in the conference room. I moved the 2 o'clock to next week because you don't need that today. I ordered lunch for the floor because I felt like it." Naomi looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Priya picked up a stack of papers and turned away. Also, Marcus called. "My brother." He said, and I'm quoting, "Tell her I'm coming to Chicago next week and she doesn't get to argue about it." Naomi thought about her brother in Atlanta, his careful distance, his birthday cards. The phone call 2 weeks ago when she'd told him everything and he had listened without interruption for 40 minutes, and at the end said very quietly, "I should have done more." She had told him he couldn't have. He had said that was probably true and that he was going to do more now regardless, and she had understood that this was Marcus's version of the hand on the arm, the same gesture in different form. "Tell him Tuesday works," she said. She went into her 9 o'clock. The trial date was set for 8 months out. In those 8 months, several things happened. The FBI's case, when it was laid out by the prosecution in preliminary filings, was substantial. Park Sung-ho's testimony was detailed and documented. There were transaction records, recorded conversations. The testimony of 2 additional cooperative witnesses whose identities were not disclosed in the public filings. Min Jae's attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had the particular energy of someone who had been doing exactly this kind of work for 30 years and found it no less interesting for that, was methodical and unruffled in a way that Naomi found either reassuring or frightening depending on the day. She attended every pretrial hearing. She sat in the gallery in suits that said nothing and everything, that communicated presence without performance, and she watched the proceeding with the same expression she had used at her family's dinners for 30 years. Present, attending, not reachable. The press photographed her leaving. She walked through them every time. Min Jae saw her in the gallery at the second hearing and after, in the car, said, "You don't have to come." "I know," she said. "It's going to be—" "I know what it's going to be," she said. "I'm coming." He didn't argue. Her father called in June. She almost didn't answer. She sat with his name on the screen through 2 rings and then answered because she had made a decision somewhere in the preceding weeks that avoidance was a thing she was done with, that seeing clearly and dealing directly was the only mode she had left, and she intended to stay in it. "Naomi," her father said. "Dad." A silence, longer than his silences usually were. He was not a man who was comfortable with silences he didn't control, and this one was not controlled. "I've been following the news," he said. "I assumed. I need to tell you something." She waited. "I knew," he said, "about what he was. Not the details. But I knew it wasn't just restaurants. I've known for a while." Another silence. "I used it. Against you. In my own head, I mean. When I needed to justify what I was asking you for, when I needed to feel like what I was doing was, I told myself you had access to money that wasn't fully legitimate, that it was all connected, that what I was taking wasn't really—" He stopped. He sounded, for the first time in Naomi's memory, genuinely old. Not the performed weariness of a man looking for sympathy, but the actual tiredness of someone who has been carrying something too long. "None of that was true. I made it up because I needed it to be true. And then I went into your house and Dad," she cut in, not cruelly, just cleanly. "I know. I'm sorry, Naomi." And there it was again, the same 2 words her mother had given her on the doorstep, and they had the same quality here. Not enough, not nearly enough, and at the same time the realest thing he had said to her in years. For all of it, for longer than just this. She sat with it. "I know you are," she said. "What does that mean? For us?" "It means I'm not going to pretend anymore," she said. "I'm not going to cover your debts, And I'm not going to come to dinners where I'm treated like a resource. And I'm not going to smile while people in our family say things about my husband that they'd never say to his face. She breathed. But it doesn't mean I stop being your daughter. It means I stop being the version of your daughter that was bad for both of us. A long silence. I'll take that, he said, if that's what you're offering. It is. Are you okay? He asked. And the question was clumsy and insufficient given everything, but she heard what was underneath it. The actual question, the one he didn't have the vocabulary to ask directly. Is the structure of you still intact after everything? Yes, she said. I am. Gerald Fitch negotiated a plea agreement in the 7th month. Naomi was not in the room when it was negotiated. She was told about it afterward, in their home, Min-jae sitting across the kitchen table from her in the same seats they had occupied on the night she told him about the FBI agent in her lobby. The agreement involved Min-jae pleading guilty to 2 counts of racketeering conspiracy in exchange for the dismissal of 6 more serious charges. He would serve time. Fitch had negotiated it to a minimum security federal facility downstate. The sentence was 42 months. He told her this with the same precision with which he told her everything. Completely, in order, without omission. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. 42 months, she said. Yes. That's 3.5 years. Yes. She looked at him. At the face she knew better than any face, the specific geography of it, the way it carried control and contained more than it showed, the way it softened when he was watching her without knowing she was watching him back. I'll be here when you get out, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Naomi, don't argue with me. I was not going to argue, he said. I was going to say, you don't have to make that decision tonight. I made it 6 months ago, she said. When I sat in that conference room and Reyes offered me a way out, and I said no. That was the decision. This is just... She stopped. This is just the math of it. He looked at the table between them, then back at her. The Scholarship Foundation, he said, that you've been planning. She had told him about it 3 months ago. The idea she'd been developing, a foundation supporting first-generation college students, financed by the documented recovery of what she'd given her family, every dollar she could reclaim put towards something that actually mattered. She had the framework drawn up, a board structure, a name. She'd been waiting for the dust to settle before filing. What about it? She said. File it before the sentencing, he said. I want to see it started before I... He stopped. For the first time in their entire conversation, something crossed his face that was not composure. A tightening around the jaw, a brief working of something he brought back under control with visible effort. I want to see it. Start it. Min-jae. Please, he said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. His hands were cold. She hadn't noticed, but they were cold, and that small physical fact hit her somewhere under the sternum with more force than any of the numbers or the sentences or the legal language of the past months. She held his hands. He turned one of them over and held hers back. They sat like that in the kitchen for a long time, not talking, just the 2 of them, and the house around them, and the city outside doing what the city did, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. She filed the foundation paperwork on a Wednesday morning in March. The Naomi Carter Foundation for First-Generation Students. The filing went through at 10:17 a.m. Priya printed the confirmation and brought it to her office without comment and placed it on her desk. And Naomi looked at it for a long time and thought about a version of herself at 22, working 3 jobs, no family money, no safety net, just the sheer stubborn engine of herself. And thought about what it would have meant to have something like this. She thought about what it was going to mean to someone else. She sent a copy of the confirmation to Min-jae. She didn't add a message. The document said everything. He texted back 20 minutes later. 2 words. Thank you. She put her phone in her drawer and went to her 9 o'clock. The sentencing was on a Friday in April. The courtroom was fuller than she expected. Press, mostly, and people she didn't recognize who had the particular quality of people with professional reasons to be present. She sat in the gallery in the front row, Marcus on her left. He had come as promised, and had stayed, and had moved his remote consulting work to Chicago for the duration with a practicality that made her love him in a way she hadn't been able to access in years. Her mother was 2 rows behind her. She had not expected her mother to come. They had spoken twice in the months since the doorstep conversation. Careful calls, not short, but not long. The calls of two people learning to be honest with each other after decades of a different arrangement. Her mother had not asked to come to the sentencing. She had simply been there when Naomi arrived, sitting in the second row in a good coat with her hands folded in her lap. And when Naomi turned and saw her, she had raised her chin slightly, the gesture of a woman who has made a decision and is not going to be questioned about it. Naomi had turned back around, but she had felt it, behind her, the weight of it. Min-jae came in with Gerald Fitch and looked immediately to the gallery, to where Naomi sat, and she looked back at him without looking away, steady, there, and something in the set of his shoulders released by a fraction that she thought probably no one else in the room would have noticed. The proceedings were what proceedings were. Language, formality, the slow machinery of institutional consequence moving at institutional speed. When the judge read the sentence, 42 months, surrender date in 3 weeks, Min-jae stood straight and said yes, Your Honor, in a voice that did not waver. She had known it was coming. She had known the number. Knowing and hearing were not the same thing, and she sat with the distance between them in her chest without letting it show on her face. 3 weeks. They spent those 3 weeks in a way that was both ordinary and not. He went to meetings she didn't ask about. The transition of his remaining legitimate businesses, she understood, the wrapping up of responsibilities. He came home for dinner every evening. They cooked sometimes, the two of them in the kitchen, in a companionable quiet she had always loved. They watched things on television and argued mildly about what to watch, and went to bed at reasonable hours, like two people trying to feel normal and achieving it more often than she expected. Marcus came to dinner twice. He and Min-jae had a conversation she was not part of that lasted almost 2 hours, and when Marcus came out of the study, his face had the expression of a man who has had a conversation that adjusted his understanding of something significant. She didn't ask what was said. Marcus told her on his own, the next morning over coffee while Min-jae was out. He asked me to look after you, Marcus said. Specifically. He said you wouldn't need it and would say you didn't, but to do it anyway. She looked at her coffee cup. He's not wrong, Marcus said. About which part? Both. He looked at her across the table. Her brother, who had left and stayed gone, and was here now. And she understood that the leaving had not been abandonment, and the staying now was not pity, and that both things had required a kind of courage that looked like its opposite. I should have come back sooner. You're here now, she said. Yeah, he said. I am. The morning he surrendered, they stood in the front hallway of the brownstone. He was dressed the way he was always dressed, precisely, without vanity, the way of a man who has decided what he is and doesn't need clothing to negotiate that. He had one bag. It was already in the car. She straightened his collar. Not because it needed straightening, because her hands needed to do something, and this was the thing they chose. He let her. When she finished, she kept her hands on his lapels for a moment and looked at his face. She was not going to cry. She had decided this the night before with the same quiet finality with which she had decided not to cry at the birthday dinner years ago, and unlike that night, the decision felt clean rather than costly. 42 months, she said. Yes, he said. The foundation's first cohort starts in September, 12 students. I know, you told me. I'm going to send you the profiles. Each one. He nodded. He was looking at her with the full focused attention she had first noticed at a dry cleaner on Michigan Avenue, the look of a man who has decided exactly what matters and is looking directly at it. When you get out, she said, I'll be standing somewhere. I don't know where yet, but I'll be standing somewhere and you'll find me. Yes, he said. I will. She stepped back. He picked up his coat. At the door, he turned around just once and looked at the house. Took it in, the front hall, the stairs, the small ordinary geography of where they had lived. And then he looked at her standing in the middle of it. Naomi, he said. Go, she said. It's all right. He went. She stood in the hallway after the door closed and listened to the car pull away. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee. She stood at the counter while it brewed and looked out the window at the backyard, the small square of it, the tree they had talked about cutting back last fall and hadn't. The morning light was coming in at the low angle of early spring, the specific quality of Chicago light in April that always felt like the city making a promise it intended to keep this time. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. You okay? She typed back, making coffee. Come over if you want. He appeared 40 minutes later with a bag of pastries he'd bought from the place 2 blocks away that she'd mentioned once, and he'd apparently filed away. They sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee and ate pastries and talked. Not about Min Jae or the trial or the family or any of the accumulated weight of the past year. Just talked. The easy conversation of two people who have finally stopped having to perform for each other. Outside, Chicago did what it did. The foundation office opened in May. Her father paid back his first installment, small, regular, a bank transfer that arrived on the first of the month, with the consistency of a man who has decided the only credible thing left to him is reliability. She acknowledged each one with a text. Brief. Present. The ongoing work of a relationship rebuilding itself one narrow plank at a time. Her mother called on Sundays. She had started calling on Sundays in February. The calls that began cautiously and had over months developed a different quality. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but something more truthful than warmth. The specific connection of two women who have finally decided to know each other rather than manage each other. Diane built her business. A small one, honest. A styling service that leveraged the genuine talent she'd always had, and had always allowed other people to fund rather than develop. She sent Naomi a link to her website in June with no accompanying message, and Naomi clicked through it and read the whole thing and texted back. The photography is really good. Diane texted back a string of emojis that Naomi couldn't fully decode but understood as embarrassed happiness. Naomi worked. She ran her firm with the attention it deserved, took on 2 new clients, promoted Priya to COO with a salary adjustment that made Priya briefly speechless. She visited the foundation office twice a week and watched the team she'd built assemble the first cohort, 12 students, first generation, chosen from a pool of over 300 applicants, with a care that she supervised personally because this was the thing that had to be done right. She wrote to Min Jae every week. Not long letters, clear ones. She told him about the foundation students, sent their profiles as promised, wrote briefly about the firm and the family and the ordinary events of the city moving through its seasons. She did not write about missing him because that felt like a category of feeling that did not need documentation. It simply existed, a constant pressure, not incapacitating, not dramatic, just real and present the way real things are. He wrote back in the careful, formal way he expressed himself in writing, which she found beautiful, the same way she'd always found it beautiful. He had questions about the students. He asked about Priya's transition to the new role. He asked about Marcus. His letters were short and exact, and she read each one twice. On a rooftop in October, the first year, she stood with a glass of wine at an event for the foundation's inaugural donors and looked out at Chicago under the particular blue of an October night sky. The lake was visible from here, just barely, a dark suggestion east of the buildings. The city spread in every direction, lit and complicated and entirely itself. She thought about a dining room table and a bill for $19,000. And the sound of her family laughing. She thought about a filing cabinet opened by a key given in trust. She thought about a conference room and a federal agent and the word cooperative and the answer she'd given it. She thought about 42 months and first-of-the-month bank transfers and Sunday phone calls and her brother sitting at her kitchen table eating pastries on a Tuesday morning like it was something he'd always done. She thought about a man who would read a letter next week describing this exact moment, this rooftop, this view, and would know that she was all right, not because she'd told him, but because she had spent 3 years teaching him how to read her. A woman appeared at her elbow, one of the foundation students, a 20-year-old named Destiny from the South Side, pre-law, the kind of sharp and guarded and quietly ferocious that Naomi recognized from the inside. "This is a lot," Destiny said, looking at the view, meaning the evening, the donors, the whole enterprise of it. "It is," Naomi said. "Why did you start it?" Destiny asked. Not suspiciously, genuinely. Naomi looked out at the city. "Because someone should have done it sooner," she said, "and I was tired of waiting for someone." Destiny nodded, the nod of a young woman filing something away. "I'm going to pay it back someday," she said. "The scholarship, all of it." "You don't have to," Naomi said. "I know I don't have to." Destiny looked at her sideways, 20 years old and already completely clear-eyed. "I'm going to anyway." Naomi looked at her. She thought about a word she had been afraid of her entire life, the word that meant needing something from the world that the world was not obligated to give, the terrifying, necessary act of accepting that you could not hold everything up alone, that the attempt to do so had cost her years and money and the quiet erosion of her own edges, and that the alternative was not weakness, but a different and more honest kind of strength. She thought about standing in a hallway and saying, "It's all right," and meaning it. She raised her glass toward the city. Not a toast, just an acknowledgement. A woman who had spent her life managing things, finally allowing herself to simply be inside them. The October air was cold and clean and entirely itself, and Naomi Carter stood in it